My name is not important. I am merely the archivist, a custodian of endings, and my subject today is a peculiar one. It is not the story of a faction's rise or a city's fall, not directly. It is the story of a man, and the profound systemic terror he introduced into the Commonwealth simply by being good. He is known as the General. Before that, he was simply Nate, a soldier from a time before the sky fell. A man preserved in ice and sorrow, thawed into a world that had rewritten every rule he had ever known. We have seen figures like him before, of course. The Wasteland is littered with the graves of would-be saviors and aspiring tyrants. They rise, they carve out their small kingdoms of scrap and fear, and then they are consumed by the very chaos they sought to tame. They are a known variable, a predictable part of the ecosystem. They operate on the principles of scarcity, of power, of brutal pragmatism. One understands their motives. One can predict their movements. They are monsters, but they are familiar monsters. The General is something else entirely. He does not seek power for its own sake. He does not demand tribute. He does not rule through fear. He builds, he protects, he gives, and in doing so, he has become the single most destabilizing force this region has seen since the bombs themselves. The established predators of this world, the ones who have thrived in the ruins, do not know how to react to him. He is an ideological contagion for which they have no immunity. His weapon is not merely the network of artillery pieces he has painstakingly restored and aimed at the sky, a constellation of promised fire. His true weapon is hope, and in a world that has commodified despair, hope is a terrifyingly volatile substance. I have undertaken the task of collating the responses to his ascent, from the sterile laboratories beneath the earth to the rusted gantries of the Pridwin, from the filth-choked dens of raiders to the shadowy back rooms of would-be city-states. A single emotion echoes: panic. It is not always a loud, screaming panic. Sometimes it is a quiet, intellectual panic, a cold, dawning dread. It is the panic of the chess master who suddenly finds his opponent's pawn moving like a queen, not because the rules have changed, but because his opponent refuses to believe the rules ever truly existed at all. This archive is a record of that panic. It is an attempt to understand what happens when a man with a pre-war moral compass is given an army in a post-war world. My first subject of study must be the most technologically advanced, the most isolated, and the most intimately connected to the General. I speak, of course, of the Institute. Down in their antiseptic world of polished chrome and recycled air, they believed they had calculated every variable on the surface. The squabbling settlements, the feral ghouls, the brutish super mutants, the technologically obsessed Brotherhood of Steel, all were factors in a grand, centuries-long equation. They were problems to be managed, controlled, and eventually replaced. The surface was a failed experiment, a petri dish of social decay they observed with cold scientific detachment. Their director, the man who called himself Father, was the lead scientist of this grand project, and the General, the man from Vault 111, was his father. The irony is so thick, it is almost a physical presence in the air. The Institute's panic was not born of fear for their lives, not at first. It was the panic of profound, systemic failure. It began with the initial reports from the Courser, designation Z247, who was tasked with observing the sole survivor's initial movements after his emergence from the vault. I have managed to acquire a transcript of its initial audio log, relayed back to synth retention. The signal was weak, corrupted by the surface interference they so disdained, but the message was clear. The oral texture of the transmission had a persistent hiss, like sand scouring metal, a sound the Institute had long ago engineered out of their own existence. The courser reported, "Subject designated Father Prime has exited the cryogenic facility. He is disoriented but functional. He has acquired pre-war attire and a rudimentary firearm. He displays anomalous behavioral patterns. Encountered a domestic robotics unit, a Mr. Handy, in his former domicile. The unit was malfunctioning, caught in a behavioral loop. Subject did not terminate it. He engaged it in conversation. He attempted to comfort the machine." There was a pause in the log, a brief moment of silent data processing. The subject exhibits sentimental attachment to pre-war artifacts and non-sentient machinery. This is a deviation from projected psychological profiles. A survivor is expected to prioritize immediate resource acquisition and threat neutralization. The subject prioritizes nostalgia. This was the first crack in their understanding. They had anticipated a hardened survivor, a pragmatic killer shaped by loss. They had a file for that. They had protocols. They did not have a protocol for a man who would stop to talk to a broken robot while the world burned around him. In the sterile observation rooms of the Institute, this report would have been met with quiet confusion. Dr. Ao, the head of the SRB, would have adjusted his glasses, his expression betraying nothing but mild academic curiosity. But beneath that, the seed of uncertainty was planted. Their perfect model of the surface scavenger was already proving flawed. Then came the Concorde incident. The general, still just a wanderer then, stumbled upon the Minutemen, or what was left of them. A handful of terrified idealists trapped in a museum, besieged by raiders. The Institute's predictive models were clear on this scenario. A rational actor would bypass the conflict. The risk-reward calculation was laughably skewed. There was nothing to be gained but a high probability of death. A more cunning actor might wait for the conflict to resolve, and then scavenge the remains of the losing side. The general did neither. He retrieved a suit of T-45 power armor, a relic of his own time, and a minigun. He did not use them to escape. He used them to save the strangers in the museum. I have a log entry from a Dr. Madison Lee, who was, at the time, working in the Advanced Systems Division. She was not directly involved in the observation of the surface, but the data was disseminated for cross-divisional analysis. Her terminal entry, dated the day after the Concorde incident, is revealing. Read the report on the surface asset, the one from Vault 111. His actions defy game theory. He expended significant resources, a fusion core, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and took on extreme personal risk for zero material gain. The individuals he rescued possessed nothing of value. They are subsistence farmers with a defunct militia. The asset's behavior is consistent with a pre-war heroic archetype, the kind found in comic books and army recruitment propaganda. It is a psychological framework that should have been scoured from any human mind by the realities of the Wasteland. Is it possible the cryogenic process preserved not just his body, but his entire obsolete worldview? We are not observing a Wasteland survivor. We are observing a living fossil, and we have no idea how it will react to this new environment. The panic grew when the general did not abandon the Minutemen after their rescue. He led them to Sanctuary Hills, his own ruined neighborhood. He did not fortify it for himself. He began to rebuild it for them. He planted crops. He engineered water purifiers. He built defenses. He turned a dead place into a living one. The Institute watched this through the cold, unblinking eyes of their synth crows, and they could not comprehend it. Their entire philosophy was predicated on the belief that the surface was irredeemable, that humanity, left to its own devices, would inevitably descend into savagery and tribalism. That was why the Institute was necessary. They were the secret shepherds, the guiding hand that would one day reclaim the world and remake it in a clean, logical image. And here was one man, a relic from their perfect, lost world, disproving their core thesis with a handful of seeds and a hammer. The director, Father, was initially dismissive. I have pieced together his perspective from conversations with disillusioned Institute personnel who later fled to the surface. He saw his father's actions as a quaint, if misguided hobby, a man clinging to the phantoms of a dead world. Let him play with his little toy soldiers, he is reported to have said during a directorate meeting. Let him build his sandcastles of mud and scrap. The tide of reality will wash them away soon enough. He will learn, as we all did, that the surface is beyond saving. Then he will come to us. He will come home. But the sandcastles did not wash away. They grew. Sanctuary became a thriving settlement. Then another settlement requested aid, and the general answered, and another, and another. He was not conquering them. He was connecting them. He established supply lines. He built radio beacons that broadcast messages not of conquest, but of mutual defense and shared prosperity. The little sparks of civilization he was nurturing began to form a network, a web of light and hope spreading across the darkened map of the Commonwealth. The Institute's panic began to solidify when they realized what he was building. It was not a raider gang. It was not a mercenary army. It was a society. It was a grassroots, decentralized, voluntary coalition of communities united by a common purpose. It was, in essence, a rudimentary government, the very thing the Institute believed could no longer exist on the surface. A key moment came when the general retook the castle, the old fortress of the Minutemen. He did not just clear out the mirelurks that had infested the place, he rebuilt the walls. He repaired the radio transmitter, and then he did something the Institute, with all its advanced technology, found truly terrifying. He brought back the artillery, old world schematics, salvaged parts, and the sheer, stubborn will of a soldier who understood the strategic value of long-range fire support. Suddenly, the Minutemen were not just a group of farmers with pipe guns. They were an army with the ability to project power across the entire region. A frantic report from an SRB field agent, a synth posing as a scavenger near the castle, highlights the shift in perception. The cannons are operational. I repeat, the cannons are operational. They are M101 howitzers, modified to fire, well, anything they can fit in the barrel. The shells are crude, often made from scavenged gas canisters packed with explosives, but the trajectory calculations are surprisingly accurate. The general oversees the training himself. He moves like a professional soldier, not a scavenger. He is teaching them trigonometry. He is teaching them how to read the wind. He is turning dirt farmers into artillerymen. We have underestimated him. We have severely underestimated him. The directorate meetings within the Institute became more heated. The faction that had advocated for reclaiming the general, for bringing him into the fold, found their position weakening. The faction that saw him as a threat, a dangerous variable that needed to be eliminated, grew more vocal. Father, caught between the two, remained resolute in his belief that his father could be made to see reason. His was the panic of a son who cannot accept that his parent is fundamentally different from him, that his own logic does not apply. I have an audio file, a personal log recorded by Father in his quarters. It was smuggled out by a railroad sympathizer. The quality is pristine, the voice calm and measured, but the words betray a deep, chilling anxiety. He continues to defy all expectations. This Minutemen organization is no longer a historical reenactment society. It is a functional military and political entity. The settlements under his protection are reporting increased crop yields, lower instances of rad sickness, and a functioning system of trade. They are rebuilding the very world we abandoned. Why? Why does he cling so desperately to the wreckage? He is my father. He is of the old world, the world of science, of progress, of reason. He should see the elegance of our solution. He should understand that the surface is a terminal patient. One does not try to heal a corpse. One prepares a new vessel for the soul. The log continues, and the voice loses some of its composure. A faint tremor of static enters the recording, as if the machine itself is sensing the disturbance in its master. He is an anomaly, a statistical improbability. His altruism should have been his undoing. It should have been exploited by the raiders, the mercenaries, the sheer grinding entropy of the Wasteland. Instead, he has weaponized it. He has turned compassion into a political ideology and backed it with high explosive shells. Every settlement he saves, every person he inspires, is a testament to our failure, a living monument to the argument that we were wrong, that we were not necessary. And if we are not necessary, then what are we? That was the core of the Institute's panic. It was not a fear of military defeat. They were confident their synths and their advanced technology could crush the Minutemen in a direct confrontation. It was a fear of ideological annihilation. The general was proving day by day that humanity did not need to be replaced. It needed to be led. It needed to be inspired. It needed to be protected. He was healing the world they had written off as dead, and in doing so, he was rendering the entire purpose of the Institute, their centuries of sacrifice and morally compromising research, utterly and completely meaningless. He was not just a threat to their power. He was a threat to their very reason for existing. The panic of the Institute was the cold, sterile horror of realizing that your entire life's work, the foundation of your whole civilization, might be built upon a single, flawed, and now demonstrably false premise. And the evidence of this flaw was your own father, walking the poisoned earth above and teaching farmers how to fire cannons, while the Institute grappled with this philosophical crisis in their clean white tomb. Another power watched the general's ascent with a much more direct and visceral sense of alarm. Above the clouds, encased in the steel belly of the Pridwin, Elder Maxon of the Brotherhood of Steel saw not an ideological threat, but a direct challenge to his authority and a perversion of everything the Brotherhood stood for. His was not the panic of a scientist whose experiment had gone wrong, but the righteous fury of a high priest watching a heretic perform miracles. The Brotherhood of Steel arrived in the Commonwealth as a cleansing fire. They were a force of order, discipline, and technological supremacy. Their doctrine was simple and absolute. Technology in the hands of the common man had led to the ruin of the world, and only the Brotherhood was disciplined enough, wise enough, to act as its custodian. They were here to seize dangerous technology, eliminate abominations, super mutants, feral ghouls, synths, and impose their vision of a secure future upon the Wasteland, whether the Wasteland wanted it or not. They were the self-appointed saviors of humanity, and their methods were uncompromising. The general and his Minutemen were, to Maxon, an absurdity, a joke, a rabble of farmers playing soldier with scavenged laser muskets and pre-war costumes. In the early days, the reports from Brotherhood patrols were dismissive. I have reviewed the scribe's field notes from that period. They described the Minutemen as a disorganized local militia, poorly equipped, and lacking in proper command structure. One scribe, a young man named Talric, noted with condescending amusement, "Their primary firearm appears to be a hand-cranked laser rifle. It is a novelty, an inefficient and unreliable weapon. It is a fitting symbol for their entire organization, a desperate attempt to harness a power they do not truly understand." This condescension began to curdle into concern as the Minutemen, under the general's leadership, began to achieve actual results. They were not just chasing off packs of ghouls, they were systematically dismantling raider operations. They were securing trade routes. They were building fortified self-sufficient communities. They were doing the Brotherhood's job, but they were doing it with the consent and cooperation of the local populace. They were not seizing crops for the war effort. They were helping to plant them. They were not confiscating technology. They were teaching people how to repair it. Elder Maxon, a man who had been raised from birth to believe in the singular righteous path of the Brotherhood, could not process this. His worldview was a fortress, and the general was laying siege to it not with cannons, but with competence. I have a recording, a transcription of a speech Maxon gave to his knights aboard the Prydwen's command deck. The official version, disseminated for morale, is a rousing call to arms. The version I have is from a scribe's personal recorder, capturing the raw audio before it was edited. The strain in Maxon's voice is palpable. "We came to this blighted land to bring order," he thundered, his voice echoing off the steel bulkheads. "We are the shield against the darkness, the last best hope for humanity. We fight the mutants that plague the ruins. We hunt the synthetic horrors that wear the skins of men. We are the line that holds, and yet this general, this man from the past, he commands a peasant army, and the people flock to his banner. They call him a hero. They look to him for protection. To him, a man who trusts the common settler with advanced weaponry, a man who sees a ghoul and offers it a home instead of a merciful bullet. He is not a soldier. He is a social worker with a private army." The last line was delivered with a sneer, but underneath it was a tremor of something that sounded like fear. The general was a soft liability, a dangerous sentimentalist whose compassion would inevitably be his downfall. That was the official doctrine. But privately, Maxon and his command staff saw something far more dangerous taking shape. They saw a rival. The moment the artillery at the castle became operational, the tone on the Prydwen shifted from condescending concern to active alarm. Proctor Ingram, the head of the Brotherhood's engineering corps, presented a tactical analysis to the Elders' Council. I have a copy of her report, recovered from a damaged terminal after the war. It is a masterpiece of technical understatement that barely conceals a deep-seated anxiety. Analysis of the Minutemen's long-range capabilities is complete. The report reads, "The artillery pieces are pre-war howitzers, as we suspected. Their targeting systems are primitive, relying on smoke signals and radioed coordinates from forward observers. Their ammunition is inconsistent. However, the sheer number of batteries they are bringing online is a cause for strategic reassessment. We have confirmed operational batteries at the castle, Sanctuary Hills, Starlight Drive-In, and at least a half-dozen smaller settlements. In effect, the general has created an overlapping field of fire that covers a significant portion of the central Commonwealth. Any Brotherhood ground operation within this zone would be subject to immediate, sustained, and highly unpredictable artillery bombardment." The report continues, "While a single shell from their makeshift arsenal poses a negligible threat to a knight in T-60 power armor, a coordinated barrage does not. Furthermore, The psychological impact on our forces cannot be ignored. Our primary advantage has always been air superiority. The Prydwen is a symbol of our might, untouchable and unassailable. But the Prydwen cannot remain on station indefinitely in airspace where the enemy can, at will, fill the sky with high explosive ordnance. The risk of a golden shot, a lucky hit on a critical system or engine, is statistically low, but it is not zero. We must now consider this civilian militia a credible anti-aircraft threat. The panic in the Brotherhood was ideological, but it was also deeply practical. The general had, with scrap metal and pre-war knowledge, effectively created a no-fly zone over the heart of his territory. The Brotherhood's vertibirds, their symbol of rapid deployment and aerial dominance, were suddenly vulnerable. Patrols began reporting near misses. One vertibird, returning from a reconnaissance mission over Quincy, was struck by shrapnel from an artillery barrage aimed at a nearby super mutant encampment. The pilot landed safely, but the message was clear. The sky was no longer exclusively theirs. Maxon's personal logs from this period, which I have had to reconstruct from fragmented data files, are filled with a growing sense of frustration and rage. He is a fool, a dangerous, naive fool, who is undoing everything my ancestors fought and died for. He gives technology to the unworthy. He coddles the irradiated. He trusts the untrustworthy. He has no understanding of the sacrifices required to ensure humanity's survival. He still believes in the pre-war dream, the very dream that led to the atomic fire that consumed the world. He is not a leader. He is a disease, a plague of sentimentality. But the logs also reveal a deeper, more personal anxiety. Scribe Alliston reported today that a farmer at the Abernathy settlement successfully repaired a damaged protectron using a schematic provided by the Minutemen. He is using it for farm labor. A robot, a piece of potentially dangerous technology in the hands of a civilian. And it works. The farm is thriving. Proctor Quinlan reports that the militia's laser muskets, which we dismissed as toys, are surprisingly effective in volley fire against lightly armored targets. Their discipline is improving. The general drills them relentlessly. He is not just giving them guns, he is giving them training. He is giving them a purpose. He is building the very thing we were supposed to be. This was the core of the Brotherhood's panic. The general was not just a military rival. He was a successful one. He was proving that a different way was possible. His Commonwealth was not based on hoarding technology and military feudalism, but on shared knowledge and mutual defense. He was building a stable, prosperous society that looked remarkably like the old world the Brotherhood claimed to be protecting, but without the Brotherhood's iron-fisted control. He was making them obsolete. The final straw was the issue of Dr. Madison Lee. When she defected from the Institute, she sought refuge with the Brotherhood of Steel. She was a valuable asset, a scientist with intimate knowledge of their primary enemy. But she was also a friend of the general. She spoke of him not as a threat, but as a man of principle, a man she trusted. When the general arrived on the Prydwen, at Maxon's own invitation, the tension was so thick you could taste the ozone. I spoke with a former knight, a man named Gavil, who was on guard duty that day. He has since left the Brotherhood, disillusioned by what he saw. Maxon thought he could intimidate the general, Gavil told me, his voice low and raspy. He stood there in his fancy coat, surrounded by paladins in full power armor. He gave his big speech about might and right. The general just stood there, in his vault suit and a piece of scavenged metal armor. He did not look impressed. He looked disappointed. Maxon offered him a place in the Brotherhood, Gavil continued, offered to make him a knight, a position of honor. The general turned him down. He said, "And I will never forget this," he said. "The people of the Commonwealth do not need another king, Elder. They need a neighbor." And then he looked at Dr. Lee, and he asked her if she was there of her own free will. He was not asking Maxon. He was asking her. He was giving her a choice. In that moment, on the command deck of the most powerful war machine in the Wasteland, he was the one with all the power, and Maxon knew it. The panic of the Brotherhood of Steel was the panic of dogma confronted with undeniable truth. They had built their entire identity on the idea that they were the only way, the only hope. The general, with his quiet competence, his unwavering morality, and his army of empowered citizens, was proving them wrong. He was not just a threat to their mission, he was a living refutation of their entire faith. And as his artillery batteries continued to spread across the map, they were forced to confront a terrifying possibility, that the future they were fighting for was one that had no place for them in it. They were becoming the very thing they hunted, a dangerous relic of a bygone era, far below the Pridwin's righteous shadow and the Institute's sterile gaze. In the filth and the fire of the Commonwealth's deepest wounds, the general's rise was perceived not as an ideological challenge, but as a change in the very laws of nature. For the raider gangs, the carrion birds of the Wasteland, the world operated on a simple, brutal calculus. The strong take and the weak die. Fear was their currency, their language, and their primary tool of statecraft. They were the apex predators of this broken world, and they believed their position was unassailable. Then came the whispers, tales of a man in blue, a ghost from the old world, who did not play by their rules. At first, they laughed. The raiders of the Corvega assembly plant, a particularly vicious tribe led by a brute named Jared, heard stories of the Minutemen retaking settlements in the north. They saw it as an opportunity, a new herd of cattle ripe for the slaughter. They sent a raiding party to Tenpeen's Bluff, a fledgling settlement under the general's protection. They went expecting terror, screams, and plunder. They found disciplined resistance. The settlers did not break and run. They took cover behind newly constructed barricades. They laid down focused fire with well-maintained pipe rifles. The raiders, accustomed to panicked, disorganized victims, were caught off guard. Then the general arrived. He did not come with a screaming war party. He flanked them, moving with the quiet efficiency of a professional soldier. He eliminated their leader with a single, precise shot to the head. The attack faltered, broke, and then routed. The survivors fled back to Corvega, babbling about settlers who fought like soldiers and a leader who moved like a phantom. Jared did not believe them. He believed it was a fluke, a lucky shot. He decided to lead a much larger force himself and burn Sanctuary Hills to the ground, to make an example of this general and his pet farmers. This, he thought, was how you re-established the natural order. You found the strongest challenger, and you broke him in front of everyone. It was a time-honored tradition. The attack on Sanctuary was a disaster for the raiders. They found not a collection of shacks, but a fortified town. Turrets, scavenged from security vaults and military installations, opened up with surprising accuracy. The settlers, led by the general, held the line at the bridge, but it was not the defenses that truly broke them. It was something else. In the middle of the firefight, a flare arced into the sky, a streak of brilliant red against the grey clouds. The raiders paused, confused. It was not a signal they recognized. Minutes later, the sky began to scream, a high whistling sound that grew louder and louder. Then the world exploded. The first shell landed in the middle of their reserves, turning a dozen raiders into a cloud of red mist and shattered metal. The second and third shells walked their way up the main road, sowing chaos and panic. The raiders had never faced artillery. They had no concept of it. It was a power that belonged to the old world, to stories of the Great War. It was the wrath of a god they did not know existed. They broke. They fled in every direction, scrambling over each other to escape the indiscriminate, earth-shattering death that fell from the sky. Jared himself was wounded, his leg torn apart by shrapnel. He was dragged away by his lieutenants, his mind unable to process what had just happened. They had come to instill fear, and they had been met with a terror so profound, so alien, that it felt like a violation of reality itself. I have the testimony of a raider named Shiv, captured by a Minuteman patrol weeks later. He was part of Jared's crew. He was a hardened killer, a man who had survived a decade in the Wasteland by being crueler and faster than everyone else. When he spoke of that day, his voice trembled. "We thought we was the baddest thing in the Commonwealth," he said, his eyes unfocused, staring at a memory burned into his brain. "We had the numbers, the chems, the rage. We was the storm. But that day we learned what real thunder sounds like. It ain't rage, it's just a sound, a whistle, and then nothing. You don't see who's killing you. You don't even know where it's coming from. It just erases you." He looked at his interrogator, a stern-faced Minuteman who had probably been fixing tractors a year ago. "You people, you ain't like us. We kill for stuff, for caps, for food, for fun. We get in your face. We make you watch. Your general, he don't want our stuff. He don't want our territory. He just wants us gone. It's like we're vermin. Like we're radroaches in his kitchen. He ain't fighting us. He's exterminating us. That's a different kind of scary. That's a whole new kind of scary." This was the nature of the raiders' panic. It was a primal, existential dread. The general was a terrifying contradiction. He was a powerful warrior who did not act like one. Warlords, they understood. You could fight them. You could bargain with them. You could even join them. A warlord's motives were clear: power, territory, wealth. The general's motives were incomprehensible. He fought with the skill of a master predator, but he fought to protect the weak. He wielded the power of a god, but he did not demand worship. He was a force of order, but it was not an order they could join or appease. It was an order that had no place for them. The various raider tribes reacted in different ways, all rooted in this same fundamental terror. The Forged, the fire-obsessed lunatics at Sorgus Ironworks, saw him as a false prophet. Their leader, Slag, declared that the general's fire from the sky was an insult to their fire god. He led his fanatics in a frenzied, chem-fueled assault on the Slog, a settlement of ghouls under Minuteman protection. He believed their faith and their flamers would protect them. The artillery barrage that followed did not distinguish between the faithful and the faithless. It turned the ironworks into a crater and the Forged into ash. The Triggermen, the pre-war gangster wannabes holed up in the back alleys of Boston, tried a different approach. They were businessmen after all. They understood protection rackets. Their leader, a smooth-talking killer named Skinny Malone, sent an envoy to the general. He proposed a deal. The Triggermen would manage the settlements in their territory, providing security in exchange for a modest tribute. The general could focus on the bigger picture. It was a classic mob offer. The general's response was not what they expected. He did not send a counteroffer. He did not send a threat. He simply sent a Minuteman representative, a woman named Ronnie Shaw, a veteran of the original Minutemen. She met with Malone's envoy in a dusty diner. She did not bring caps or contracts. She brought a map. She calmly circled the location of every triggerman's safe house, every speakeasy, every hidden armory. "The General appreciates your offer," she said, her voice as hard as concrete. "But the people of the Commonwealth already have protection, and we do not charge. Consider this your one and only warning. Vacate these properties, cease all extortionist activities, or the next map we draw will be for our artillery crews." The triggermen, who built their empire on intimidation, were being intimidated. And they were being intimidated by something they could not fight. You cannot shoot a map. You cannot threaten an artillery shell that is already in the air. Their business model, which relied on being the only source of protection, was rendered obsolete overnight. Their panic was the cold sweat of a predator that has just realized it is no longer at the top of the food chain. Even the super mutants, a force of raw green destruction, began to learn a new kind of fear. They were not intelligent enough for existential dread, but they understood brute force. They learned to associate the sound of a red flare with the sudden violent death of their behemoth masters. They learned that fortified encampments like Trinity Tower were not safe if the sky itself became an enemy. A captured mutant, interrogated by a Brotherhood patrol, was heard to mutter a single repeated phrase: "Boom boom Skyman, hate boom boom Skyman." The panic of the raiders was the panic of the obsolete monster. They were a product of a lawless world, a world where the only rule was survival of the fittest. The General was reintroducing law. He was changing the definition of fittest. It was no longer about who was the most brutal, but who was the most cooperative. He was terraforming the human ecosystem of the Commonwealth, and the raiders were an invasive species he was methodically, impersonally, and terrifyingly removing. They could not fight him, because he was not just a man. He was an idea, and his idea was backed by a rain of fire that could find them anywhere. The fear that gripped the Commonwealth's established powers was not confined to the overt threats of raiders or the ideological monoliths of the Institute and Brotherhood. It seeped into the cracks of the so-called civilized world, into the political structures that had formed in the vacuum of the old government. In the winding, scrap metal streets of Diamond City and the shadowy, vice-filled alleys of Goodneighbor, the General's rise was met with a complex mixture of public applause and private, gnawing anxiety. Here, the panic was political. It was the terror of the status quo being upended by a man who respected people more than he respected power. In Diamond City, the great green jewel of the Commonwealth, Mayor McDonough was the face of order. He was a politician, a master of the double deal and the reassuring speech. He maintained a fragile peace, balanced the interests of the city's wealthy elite against the grumbling of the common folk, and most importantly, kept the city isolated and fearful of the outside world. His public stance on the Minutemen was one of cautious support. He praised the General's efforts to tame the wastes, to make the trade routes safer. It was good for business after all. Privately, McDonough was in a state of escalating terror. His position, his power, his very life depended on maintaining the Institute's carefully orchestrated illusion of surface chaos. As a synth replacement, his primary directive was to ensure Diamond City remained a stagnant, self-interested, and easily manipulated entity. He was a shepherd managing a flock for a master who intended to one day lead them to the slaughterhouse. The General was not just building a rival power, he was tearing down the fences. I have managed to access McDonough's personal terminal in the mayor's office. The official records are filled with bland proclamations and budget reports. But in a hidden, encrypted partition, I found his true reports to his handlers in the Institute. They paint a stark picture of a man watching his world crumble. An early entry reads, Subject, Minutemen. The resurgence of this faction is a minor nuisance. Their leader, the asset from Vault 111, is a charismatic amateur. He has secured a few outlying farms. Public opinion within the city is largely indifferent. I will continue to foster this indifference, emphasizing the unreliability of surface militias and the security of our walls. A few months later, the tone shifts dramatically. Subject, the general. His influence is growing at an alarming rate. Caravans now arrive from settlements I had written off as lost causes. They speak of him with a reverence that is unsettling. They are no longer just isolated pockets of survivors. They are members of the Commonwealth Minutemen. They have a shared identity. My propaganda about the dangers of the Waste is becoming less effective. He is actively disproving it. The entry that truly reveals his panic was written after the general established a major settlement at Starlight Drive-In, complete with a large-scale water purification system and a bustling trade market. He is building a rival city. Starlight is less than a day's walk from our gates. He offers free, clean water. He offers land for farming. He offers protection without demanding allegiance to a single, walled-off authority. He is draining my population. 3 families from the lower stands left this week, heading for Starlight. They said they wanted a future. The economic pressure is becoming untenable. The caravan masters are starting to grumble about my tariffs. They say the general's routes are safer and tax-free. I am losing control, requesting guidance, requesting new directives. The old ones are no longer applicable in this new paradigm. The Institute's guidance, of course, was slow to come. They were having their own crisis of faith. McDonough was left to twist in the wind, a puppet whose strings were being cut one by one. His panic was that of the secret agent whose cover is not just blown, but rendered irrelevant. The general was not trying to expose him. He was simply building a world where a man like McDonough, a creature of secrets and fear-mongering, had no purpose. Across the wasteland, in the anarchic, ghoul-friendly streets of Goodneighbor, the reaction was different, but the underlying anxiety was the same. John Hancock, the charismatic ghoul mayor, was no friend of the Institute. He styled himself as a revolutionary, a man of the people. On the surface, he and the general should have been natural allies, and in many ways, they were. Hancock respected the general's strength, his commitment to protecting the downtrodden. He saw the Minutemen as a welcome counterweight to the Brotherhood's bigotry and the Institute's tyranny. But Hancock was also the king of a very specific kind of kingdom. Goodneighbor was a haven for the outcasts, the junkies, the criminals, the people who did not fit into the neat, tidy boxes of places like Diamond City. Its motto was of the people for the people, but it was understood that the people were a certain kind of people. The freedom in Goodneighbor was the freedom of low expectations. You could be whoever you wanted, as long as you did not cause too much trouble for your neighbors. It thrived on a certain level of chaos. The general was bringing order. Not the jackbooted order of the Brotherhood, but a gentle, persuasive order based on mutual respect and shared responsibility. And that, to Hancock, was a subtle but profound threat. I sat with Hancock one night in the third rail, sharing a bottle of questionable whiskey. He was watching the drunks and the chem dealers, a wry smile on his face that did not quite reach his eyes. "The general's a good man," he said, swirling the liquor in his glass. "Maybe the best I've ever met. He walks into a room and people want to be better. It's a hell of a trick. He's building something real out there, something clean." He took a long drink. "And that's what worries me. Good Neighbor ain't clean. It's a beautiful, filthy mess. We're the island of misfit toys, man. What happens when the world he's building doesn't need an island like this anymore? What happens when his settlements are so safe, so prosperous, that nobody needs to run away to a place like Good Neighbor?" His panic was not for his power, but for his purpose. "He's building a world where everyone fits in," Hancock mused, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "But some of us are defined by not fitting in. This place, this beautiful, ugly town, it runs on broken things. The general, he fixes things. I just worry that one day he's going to look at Good Neighbor and see something that needs fixing. And I'm not sure I'd like his definition of fixed." Then there was the railroad, the most secretive of all the Commonwealth's factions. Their entire existence was a shadow play of safe houses, code words, and desperate escapes. Their mission was noble and singular: to rescue escaped synths from the clutches of the Institute. They were spies, saboteurs, and freedom fighters. And their greatest asset was the chaos and ignorance of the surface world. In a fractured, hostile wasteland, a few people smuggling a synth from one ruin to another could go unnoticed. Desdemona, the leader of the railroad, initially saw the general as a godsend. He was a powerful enemy of the Institute, a man with the military might to challenge them directly. He drew their attention. He disrupted their operations. The railroad's early interactions with him were positive. He was sympathetic to their cause. He helped them, protected their agents, and even assisted in the extraction of high-value synth assets. But as the Minutemen's network grew, a new and unexpected problem arose. The general was making the Commonwealth safe. His patrols made the roads less dangerous. His settlements were well lit, organized communities. His communication network meant that news and strangers traveled fast. The very chaos that had served as the railroad's camouflage was being systematically burned away. I have a transcript of a heated conversation between Desdemona and Deacon, her master of disguise, salvaged from one of their dead drops. Deacon had just returned from a mission that had nearly gone wrong. "It's getting too bright out there, Des," Deacon's voice says, tense and frustrated. "We tried to move a package through the Concord area. 10 years ago, that was a ghost town. Now, it's Minutemen territory. We got stopped at 3 different checkpoints. They were polite, professional even. Offered us food and water, but they logged our names. They asked where we were going. We had to use our backup identities, burn a whole network of legends. The scared settler routine doesn't work when the settlements aren't scared anymore." Desdemona's reply is heavy with weariness. "The general is winning the war, Deacon. That's a good thing." "Is it?" Deacon retorts. "He's winning it out in the open. We live in the dark. His new world is all about transparency, about knowing your neighbors, about working together. Our work depends on anonymity, on secrets, on being the people you don't notice. What happens when he's done? When he's built his perfect, safe little Commonwealth? Is there a place in it for a bunch of spooks who lie for a living? What happens when one of his patrols finds a synth with a wiped memory, and they help them by trying to find their family? He's making the world too safe for our people to hide in." The panic of the railroad was the most ironic of all. Their greatest ally was becoming their greatest logistical threat. The general's success was creating a world where their methods were becoming obsolete. The darkness they had learned to navigate so expertly was receding, and they were afraid of being exposed by the light. They, like Hancock, feared being fixed. The general was building a society with a functioning immune system, and the railroad, for all its noble intentions, was a foreign body. They feared that one day that immune system would identify them as a threat to its stability and purge them, not out of malice, but out of a simple, logical desire for order. The political panic in the cities and the shadows was the fear of being tidied up, of being organized, of being absorbed into a whole that had no room for their particular cherished brand of beautiful, necessary chaos. Beyond the ideological struggles and political machinations, there exists, in the Commonwealth, a class of warrior for whom conflict is not a means to an end, but the end itself. They are not driven by faith like the Brotherhood, nor by a twisted vision of the future like the Institute. They are not bound by the primal, chaotic rage of the raiders. They are professionals. They are the gunners, the largest, best equipped, and most ruthless mercenary army in the region. And their reaction to the rise of the general was one of cold, professional fury. Their panic was economic. The gunners' business model was predicated on a simple, brutal truth of the Wasteland. Security is a commodity. Where there is fear, there is profit. They were the purveyors of that security for a price. They guarded caravans, strong-arm settlements into protection rackets that were just a polite form of extortion, and took on wet work contracts for anyone with enough caps. They built their fortresses on the ruins of the old world's military installations, Gunners Plaza, the G&N building, Vault 95. And from these strongholds, they projected an aura of invincible professional violence. They were the only game in town when it came to organized, disciplined military force for hire. The Minutemen changed that. At first, the gunner leadership, a shadowy council of veteran commanders led by a man named Captain Wes, saw the Minutemen as beneath their notice. They were amateurs, rabble. If a settlement hired the Minutemen for protection, it was because they could not afford the gunners' premium rates. It was a sign of a low-value client, not a serious competitor. Their market was the high end, Diamond City, the Bunker Hill caravans, the wealthy water merchants. This perception began to fracture when the general started not just protecting settlements, but liberating them from the gunners themselves. The case of Quincy is the most poignant example. The town of Quincy had been a thriving community, one of the few places that could be called a genuine success story in the post-war Commonwealth. It was also the home of the original Minutemen. Then the gunners came. They offered protection. When the town refused, they laid siege to it. It was a brutal, systematic campaign that ended in a massacre. The gunners took the town, executed its leadership, and turned it into a major base of operations. The event became known as the Quincy Massacre, and it was the death knell of the old Minutemen. It was also the gunners' most effective piece of advertising. It sent a clear message: hire us or be destroyed by us. Years later, the general arrived. He did not come with a small strike force. He came with an army of hardened Minutemen, veterans of a dozen smaller battles, and he came with artillery. He laid siege to the town that had been the symbol of his faction's greatest failure. The battle for Quincy was not a skirmish. It was a conventional war. Minutemen forces established a perimeter, cutting off gunner supply lines. Forward observers climbed the rusted girders of the nearby highway, calling in coordinates. Then the shelling began. It was not the scattered, harassing fire he used on raider camps. It was a sustained, methodical bombardment. The artillery targeted command posts, sniper nests, and heavy gun emplacements. It was a professional military operation, planned and executed with a chilling degree of precision. The gunners, who prided themselves on their military hardware and tactics, found themselves on the receiving end of a superior strategy. They were soldiers, but they were soldiers fighting for a paycheck. The Minutemen were fighting for a symbol, for revenge, for the very soul of their organization. I have a log from a gunner commander, a Lieutenant Clint, whose body was found in the ruins of a church in Quincy. His terminal was still functional. His final entry is a testament to the gunners' dawning horror. They're using real tactics, combined arms. They're pinning us down with heavy fire from the overpass, while their infantry advances under the cover of an artillery barrage. This isn't a militia. This is an army. Who the hell is leading them? Our comms are a mess. The shells keep coming. They're targeting our command structure. It's like they know our playbook. The final lines are a scrawl of panicked text. They've breached the western wall. Baker's squad is gone. They're not taking prisoners. This isn't a contract dispute. This is an eradication. This is for Quincy. God help us. This is for Quincy. The retaking of Quincy sent a shockwave through the entire mercenary underworld. It was more than just a military defeat. It was a catastrophic blow to the gunners' brand. Their entire business was built on their reputation for being the strongest, most reliable force in the Commonwealth. The general had not just beaten them, he had humiliated them, retaking the very symbol of their dominance. The economic fallout was immediate and devastating. Settlements that had been paying the gunners for protection began to default. Why pay for security from the second best army when the best army was offering it for free? Caravan masters, who had once paid hefty fees for gunner escorts, found that traveling with a Minuteman flag was a far more effective deterrent. The gunners' revenue streams began to dry up. Captain Wes and the gunner leadership found themselves in an impossible position. Their panic was the cold, calculated fear of a corporation facing bankruptcy. They tried to adapt. They began taking on more aggressive, high-risk contracts, trying to recoup their losses. They staged raids on Minutemen supply lines, hoping to disrupt the general's logistics. But this only made the situation worse. It cast them in the role of common raiders, further damaging their professional reputation. And for every supply convoy they hit, the general retaliated by leveling one of their outposts with an artillery strike. The core of the gunners' problem was that they could not understand their enemy's business model. They were a for-profit enterprise. The Minutemen were a non-profit. How do you compete with a competitor who has zero labor costs, whose soldiers are all volunteers, and whose primary service is offered free of charge? The general was not just defeating them in the field. He was undercutting them in the market. He had created a bubble of security and prosperity that was expanding daily, and the gunners were on the outside of it. An intercepted gunner radio communication between two squad leaders sums up their desperation perfectly. The signal is clear, the voice is professional but laced with an undeniable edge of despair. Command wants us to hit the supply line running from Abernathy to Starlight, says it's a priority target. Again? What's the point? We hit them last week, lost 3 people. For what? A few bags of potatoes and some scrap metal. 2 days later, the general sends a dozen more farmers with shotguns to guard the next one. And the day after that, a shell lands on our barracks at Mass Pike. It's a losing trade, Marcus. A goddamn losing trade. So what do? The caps are drying up. The contracts are getting thin. Half the new recruits are deserting, saying the pay's not worth getting shelled in your sleep. I don't know. Maybe we pack up, head south. I hear the capital Wasteland is still a mess. Good for business. and leave all this to him, to a charity army. It's not right. It's not professional. The panic of the gunners was the panic of the professional killer, who wakes up one day to find that the world no longer values his skills. The general was not just killing them, he was making them redundant. He was building a world that did not need mercenaries because it had heroes. He was systematically destroying their market by eliminating the fear upon which it was built. For the gunners, the most terrifying thing about the general was not his army or his artillery. It was the simple, devastating fact that he was bad for business. He was peace, and peace was poison to their bottom line. In collating these records, in tracing the threads of fear that connect the Institute's sterile labs to the gunners' bloody balance sheets, a single, unifying truth emerges. The panic induced by the general was not merely a reaction to his military prowess. The Wasteland has seen powerful armies before. It was a reaction to the source of that prowess. His power did not come from a secret vault of advanced technology, nor from a ruthless ideology of conquest. It came from the people. It was a power granted, not taken. And this is a concept so alien to the post-apocalyptic mindset that it breaks the logic of all who encounter it. The general's most disruptive act was not the rebuilding of the castle or the deployment of his cannons. It was his unwavering, almost pathological altruism. He would divert a critical mission to rescue a single settler from a pack of ghouls. He would spend days clearing a single building of raiders, not for the loot, but because a nearby settlement needed the scrap metal to build a water pump. He operated on a moral calculus that every other power in the Commonwealth had long since dismissed as a fatal liability. Consider the perspective of a raider. You live by a simple code. Take what you can, kill who you must. You see a man leading an army, and you assume he's just a more successful version of you. You try to understand his angle. What is his tribute? What is his territory? Then you learn he demands no tribute. He claims no territory for himself, only for the people who live on it. He is not accumulating wealth. He is distributing it. This is not just confusing. It is terrifying. It suggests the existence of a moral framework you cannot comprehend. And anything you cannot comprehend is a potential threat. He is like a creature from a different dimension, operating on laws of physics you cannot see. Consider the Brotherhood of Steel. Their entire existence is justified by the idea that ordinary people cannot be trusted with power. They are the guardians, the stern fathers protecting humanity from itself. Then the general appears. He trusts ordinary people. He gives them power, laser rifles, training, artillery support, and they do not use it to destroy themselves. They use it to build a better world. They become self-reliant. The general is not just proving the Brotherhood's methods wrong. He is proving their fundamental premise wrong. He is demonstrating that the children do not need a stern father, just a good teacher. This undermines the Brotherhood's very identity, shaking the foundations of their faith. It is the panic of a God who discovers that his worshippers can achieve salvation without him. And the Institute, the epitome of detached, rational self-interest. They saw the surface as a failed state, a chaotic mess of savages scrabbling in the dirt. Their solution was to abandon it, control it from afar, and eventually replace it with something clean and predictable. The general, their own flesh and blood, walked out into that chaos and began to organize it. He did not use synths or teleportation. He used trust. He used empathy. He used the radical notion that if you help someone, they might just help you back. He built a functioning, multicellular society out of the very cancer the Institute had declared terminal. Their panic was the dawning horror of realizing that their clean, logical solution was an answer to a question he was proving was never worth asking. They had spent 2 centuries building a sterile lifeboat, while he was busy teaching the drowning how to swim. The general's true weapon was his pre-war morality, perfectly preserved in the cryogenic frost of Vault 111. In the world of 2077, his values, community, self-sacrifice, unwavering optimism, were the bedrock of a functioning society. In the world of 2287, they were a revolutionary force. He was a walking, talking embodiment of a world that everyone else had forgotten, a ghost whose very presence was a judgment on the grim reality they had come to accept. I have one final document to include in this archive. It is not a military report or a secret log. It is a child's drawing, which I found pinned to a bulletin board in a small settlement called County Crossing. The settlement had been harassed by raiders for months. The general and a handful of Minutemen drove them off. They stayed for a week, helping to rebuild the walls and plant new crops. The drawing is done in charcoal on a piece of faded pre-war paper. It depicts a stick figure wearing a blue suit and a funny-shaped hat, standing on a wall. Around the wall are smaller stick figures smiling. In the sky, there are crudely drawn birds and a sun with a happy face. At the bottom, in a child's scrawl, are the words, "The general keeps the monsters away." This is the source of his power. This is the root of the panic that has gripped the Commonwealth. The raiders, the Brotherhood, the Institute, they are all monsters of a kind. They thrive in a world where the people are afraid. They are the things that go bump in the night. The general is the man who turns on the lights. He is not building an empire. He is building a community. He is not fighting for a prize. He is fighting for an idea. The idea that the world does not have to be this way, that people can be better, that the monsters do not have to win. My conclusion, as the archivist of this chaotic era, is a grim one. The general has introduced a variable that has broken every equation of power in this land. He has proven that altruism, backed by sufficient firepower, is the most potent force in the Wasteland. But the Wasteland is a patient, hungry thing. It has swallowed saviors before. The question is not whether the general can defeat the current monsters. The evidence suggests he can. The question is whether the world he builds can survive him. Can a society forged by one good man's will endure once that man is gone? Or is this just a fleeting moment of warmth, a brief candle lit in a vast, dark and hungry ruin? The dust, as always, will remember the answer, and I, the archivist, will be here to record it.